Now let's go over to the United States and have a look at what's going on in New Hampshire this evening. Nikki Haley and Donald Trump are going toe-to-toe for the first time in the election. Trump holds a commanding 14-point lead over his Republican rival. However, polls show 20% of voters are still a little bit undecided. But let's cross live now to our resident US politics expert, Mr. Joe Concha. Joe, before we start, I just want to bring some breaking news to you. Apparently, President Joe Biden's been speaking at his first campaign rally in Virginia, and he was interrupted, apparently, by some protesters. Take a look at this. You can hear the Biden supporters all shouting 4 more years, but you've obviously got people with Palestinian flags there demonstrating. They were led away by security. But Joe Biden, unusual to see him actually out in public, I'd have to say, Joe. I guess you've got the same problem with the Palestinian supporters that we have here. They seem to turn up pretty much everywhere. Everywhere you look, there's Palestinian flags being put up. It's getting a bit boring, it has to be said. But what do you make of Joe Biden doing his first sort of rally today around about the same time as the New Hampshire primary?
It's very interesting only because it's in Virginia. Virginia has gone Democratic for the last 4 presidential elections. So it seems that when Biden is campaigning, it has to be in a state that isn't too far from the White House. So last week he was in Pennsylvania, and then he was in Virginia. He actually did go to North Carolina about a week ago. But again, this is all East Coast driven in states where he doesn't really have a shot in North Carolina. Pennsylvania, yes, is important, but at some point he's going to have to fly to a Wisconsin or to an Arizona or Nevada or Georgia, all these swing states where he's trailing Donald Trump by right now. Overall, the Palestinian problem is a problem for Joe Biden, only because he's been so staunch in his support for Israel that in places like Michigan, where they have a large Muslim population, he's down by 10 points to Donald Trump. If he loses Michigan to Trump, it's pretty much over. That is a must-win state for Joe Biden, and ironically, it's the left that may end up bringing him down in that particular state.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, of course, Michigan was a key state, was it not, back in 2016, when Hillary Clinton kind of didn't bother going to that part of America and figured that she would just win it anyway.
That's right. She never went to Wisconsin once because she thought she had it in the bag. Right. Michigan, she barely visited at that point because Democrats always won Michigan and right. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. They won every time since 1988. She took it for granted, and it cost her. Yeah, absolutely. Donald Trump goes up to New Hampshire today against Nikki Haley. I mean, it's a quirky state, isn't it, New Hampshire? They've got a lot of students up there. They've got, I think, the ability for people who are non-Republicans to vote in the Republican primary. What are you expecting to be the result tonight? I think if we remember the old Mike Tyson fights back in the 80s, where you'd see a first or second round knockout, I think that's what we're going to see, as we did with Trump in Iowa. It is a quirky state, New Hampshire, yes. Democrats can come out and vote against Trump if they so choose. I don't really see a lot of that happening. Overall, the polls just show that Donald Trump is really pulling away now at this point, even in a two-way race against Nikki Haley. And as everybody from Ted Cruz to John Kasich to Marco Rubio to Jeb Bush and now Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley are finding out running against Donald Trump is a fool's errand because his supporters are so loyal, they're impossible to peel away. And it looks like we're headed towards a Joe Biden Donald Trump rematch if Joe Biden is the nominee, and there's still some question around that. Yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, the questions around that are coming from which side of the party? I mean, are the leftists really taking over, or is it the more sensible people who say, look, this guy may not have it in him. He may not be able to unite the party. He may not be able to bring everybody along. So let's find somebody else. And if so, who is that person? Well, one scenario that we're hearing about in the States, and it's chatter and nothing more, I should say, this is speculation, not, hard reporting that we're doing here. But what you hear privately at parties and in happy hours is that Democrats will decide that Joe Biden can't beat Donald Trump this time around, that people are very uncomfortable with having an 86-year-old president in the White House who is not aging well, and that's how old Joe Biden would be at the end of a second term. So at the convention, Democratic National Convention in Chicago, they will replace Joe Biden. Delegates will, superdelegates will, not voters, with one Michelle Obama, Chicago's hometown gal, obviously the former First Lady, currently, according to polling, the most popular woman still in the world. So that's one scenario, but I can't see her leaving her palatial estate in Martha's Vineyard and giving up her Netflix producing and the Emmys. I don't think she wants any part of it, but that's one scenario that we're hearing about.
That's amazing. I mean, only in America could you say that, couldn't you? Because it's a bit like, without wishing to be in any way disparaging, like the World Series is not really a series. I know it's based on the name of a newspaper, and it's not actually. But people around the rest of the world go, how can they call it a World Series? You know, how can you call Michelle Obama the most popular woman in the world? You know, wouldn't there be? I mean, Taylor Swift might have a bit of an argument for you there.
That's a great point. I would think Swift probably would pass her up at this point, given what we're seeing. But I never considered that World Series argument before. You're right. It's the United States series, right? It's a sport basically played in, you know, not England. I guess you guys played a little bit, but not the way we do. So, yeah, I'm going to have to take this up with the Major League Baseball commissioner, who I have a direct line with.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we used to ask the question all the time, and it turns out that it was based around a newspaper that was called The World, which was based, I think, in the old days in New York, and so that's what they called it after. Wow. But, you know, Michelle Obama, that would really be a left field appointment, though, wouldn't it?
Oh, it absolutely would. But we also hear names like Gavin Newsom, who's the current governor of California. Doesn't have a great record to run on there, considering that more people are leaving his state than any other state in the country for a reason. We hear about Gretchen Whitmer. She's the governor of Michigan, how she could step in. But this is all predicated on the fact that Joe Biden will just go along with all this. I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to get the keys away from Grandpa when he shows that he can't drive anymore. He doesn't give those keys up very easily. And I can see Biden saying, hey, look, I beat this guy last time. I won by 7 million votes. Why don't you think I can do that again? Right. So, again, a lot of things have to happen here. I think in the end, though, if we just look at this logically, it's Trump versus Biden, and Trump has the upper hand right now because he's on the right side of all the issues when it comes to economy and energy and trade and education. The border is a big problem here, as you've been reporting. Right. And then, obviously, foreign policy. The world seems like it's on fire because it basically is.
Well, it really is, yeah. And you don't want to look behind the curtain just in case there's another sort of missile coming your way. But, I mean, what about the vice presidential candidates? Because would you assume, and would I assume, that Kamala Harris is still going to be Biden's vice presidential candidate if he decides that, or if everybody decides to let him run? And who do you think Trump's going to favour?
Well, having Kamala Harris in the ticket, when you have Joe Biden at age 81, a heartbeat away from the presidency, not a lot of Americans can see Kamala Harris as the commander-in-chief and leader of this country. So that is definitely a net negative than positive. The problem is if you remove the first woman of color who's vice president, that can really alienate black voters, minority voters who may say, wait, you're replacing Kamala Harris for what reason? Probably just to try to earn more votes somewhere. So that would probably be a net negative by removing her as well. So they're stuck with Kamala. As far as Donald Trump and who he'll decide on, I'm leaning towards Tim Scott right now, who is a senator from South Carolina, the first black senator from the South. Obviously a very optimistic guy. He ran for president. It didn't go well, but everybody likes Tim Scott. And even Democrats have a problem criticizing him. So I could see him going in that direction, or Kristi Noem, who is a popular governor here as well. But either way, people don't elect vice presidents, right? They elect presidents. In the end, the choice will come down to Donald Trump versus Joe Biden and where people want the country to go. And even though Donald Trump has 91 felony counts against him, that only seems to be helping him as far as voters here, because they see our political system and our justice system is being weaponized at this point.
And that will be the next date to look ahead to, I suppose, will it not? The Supreme Court ruling on whether or not Donald Trump is an ineligible candidate in certain states of the US, like Colorado, where they've tried to basically row him out on the grounds that he was involved in some kind of insurrection, judged by them.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, Donald Trump's never been charged with insurrection, right? So the whole premise of taking him off the ballot in Colorado and in Maine has no legal merit, it would seem, if you speak to serious legal analysts here in the United States and elsewhere. So when you try to start removing somebody from a ballot or put them in prison before an election, I think it only galvanizes those who are sane and sober, and they say, wait a minute, this isn't how this should be decided. Let voters decide at the ballot box if Donald Trump should be president or if Joe Biden should be president, but it shouldn't come down to a judge and jury, or it shouldn't come down to not even being able to vote for him in a place like Colorado or Maine. The whole thing is rancid, and it's not being received well by the American public. The partisans love it, right? The liberals are like, oh, great, let's put Trump in jail. But I think the independents, the people that decide elections ultimately in the middle, they don't like this one bit.
No, exactly right. And what's the country's mood at the moment, Joe, on what is going on around the world? The Middle East, as you say, pretty much on fire. You know, we've got the Houthis aiming at ships in the Red Sea, the US and the UK cooperating to try and put a stop to that. But obviously obviously, you've got Netanyahu under pressure from the likes of Joe Biden and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to try and do some kind of a deal with Hamas. He doesn't want to do it. Is there still no real appetite for military conflict in the US?
Well, certainly not, because we see, for instance, what's going on in Ukraine. In Ukraine and Russia, we're coming up now on the 2-year, if you want to call it, anniversary of Russia invading Ukraine. And now they're at a stalemate. You don't really hear much about what's going on over there because the Ukrainians can't push the Russians out and the Russians can't get towards major cities like Kyiv. They're stuck on the Eastern Front. So meanwhile, Americans see more than $100 billion being fed to what has always been a corrupt country in Ukraine, and there's no real accountability as far as where this money is going.
They spend it fast, don't they, as well? I mean, they get rid of that money pretty damn quick.
That's right. And then we lost 2 U.S. Navy SEALs just this week in the Red Sea. And as you said, the Houthis are it's target practice against U.S. ships at this point. So nothing feels stable. And that's another Trump argument, by the way. From 2017 to 2021, we weren't at war anywhere. There was stability in the world. North Korea was tamed. ISIS was destroyed. Yeah. So that's another feather in the cap of Donald Trump as far as contrasting his record against Joe Biden, where it's been basically perpetual war since he's come into office.
Yeah. So, I mean, after today, what's the next sort of big landmark in the Republican primaries? I mean, do you think that if Nikki Haley doesn't do well, she'll just throw the towel in and give up?
Yes, I absolutely believe that. I think if she doesn't win, if she's not within 8-10 points, then there really is no path for her going forward. Some people will point to South Carolina. That's Nikki Haley's home state. She was a two-term governor there, and say, well, maybe she should wait around for that, until you look at polls in South Carolina that shows Donald Trump up anywhere from 30 to 40 points. So there just doesn't seem to be a road ahead for Haley. And DeSantis Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, was smart to drop out because he was about to be smoked in New Hampshire. So if Nikki Haley is blown out here tonight and Trump wins decisively, you don't see any path for her going forward, and she should save her political capital because there's always 2028. She's still a relatively young woman, still could win the presidency. Just when you run against Donald Trump, as something like 30 people have found out that have run against him, it doesn't go well.
No, he is literally a juggernaut, and you just got to get out of the way, I guess. Joe Concha, thank you very much indeed. Good to talk to you all the way from New York City there and the United States of America. The New Hampshire primaries, of course, will bring you all the latest news on that throughout the course of the day tomorrow, as after the results come in tonight. It'll be on Talk Today in the morning.